At hour 37 of their panic, when my son tried to bribe a desert scrub jay with a protein bar and my daughter-in-law was crying into an emergency blanket, I almost stepped out from behind the boulder and ended the show. Almost. I had promised myself 2 full days, 48 hours, before I let them find me. After all, they'd left me to roast at 42 degrees under a punishing Arizona sky because my constant chatter was ruining their Grand Canyon vacation. A little lesson in listening felt overdue. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and tell me the city you're listening from, so I can see how far a grandmother's desert revenge can travel. My name is Vera Dunn. I am 63, and I talk. I talk the way desert wind talks through juniper, steady, surprising, sometimes sharp, often musical. I talk because my late husband, Lionel, used to say my voice was home. I talk because silence after he died felt like a canyon of its own. If you've ever stood at the South Rim and looked down into a mile of red rock and shadow, you know the feeling: beautiful, terrifying, and far too quiet. My son Owen, 38, says I talk to fill space. My daughter-in-law, Mara, says I talk to control it. They do not agree on much, but they agreed on this. On our family trip to the Grand Canyon, I was to keep the commentary to a minimum, okay, Mom? The word minimum landed like grit between teeth. I smiled, packed my sun hat, my ancient point-and-shoot camera, 3 sticks of lip balm, a pocket notebook, and the emergency kit Lionel insisted I carry on every hike. He had been a search and rescue volunteer in our mountain town, patient, stubborn, faithful. He taught me 3 things you never forget. Water is everything, shade is currency, and pride will kill you faster than thirst. Pride, however, makes an excellent engine for petty ideas. Day 1 was supposed to be simple. We'd drive from Flagstaff at dawn, park at the South Rim, take a shuttle to Mather Point, gasp as if the photographs had not already spoiled every angle, then follow the rim trail until the kids complained of heat and we rewarded them with ice cream priced like gemstones. Owen planned it with spreadsheets that had color coding for sunscreen reapplication. Mara booked a lunch reservation that baffled me. How does one make a reservation with a canyon? But she insisted there was a lodge with a view and a salad big enough to offset all the hiking. Their 2 teenagers, Ellie and Nico, did not protest. They were busy training their thumbs on tiny bright screens, wrists flicking like frightened fish. The sky was a sheet of unblemished blue. The asphalt on the park road radiated heat, as though it had opinions. When we stepped down from the shuttle bus at 11:16 a.m., the world opened. People always say it's like looking at a painting, but paintings have edges. The canyon does not. The canyon is a story with too many middles and no proper end. I started to tell them that, about middles, about layers of ancient sea and ash turned to cathedral walls, and Mara breathed out the word, Mom, like a warning. I'll be quick, I promised. Just facts, no poems. I lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then the cliff swallows spiraled below us as if they were planets with their own orbit, and I said, Look, they nest right in the cracks where the shade holds, and Owen said, Can we enjoy it without a running documentary? You can, I said brightly. I'll narrate select highlights. I laughed. Owen did not. Mara tightened the strap on her camera and looked at the map as if the map owed her an apology. Ellie and Nico drifted toward the rail in their summer uniforms, shorts, oversized tees, headphones shaped like clouds. A breeze rose, tasted like hot coins. We walked east along the rim trail toward Yavapai Point, following a ribbon of asphalt that alternated between pine shade and raw blaze. I fell behind because every plant wanted a word from me. The prickly pear with its urgent flowers, the paintbrush turned to sparks, the agave spearing the sky. I told Lionel's story out loud to nobody. The time he found a dehydrated hiker who had tried to make good time in the sun, how he shaded the man with his own body as the team moved up the slope inch by serious inch, repeating, Small steps are still steps. I touched the blistered bark of a ponderosa and smelled vanilla, sugar cookie, some say, but Lionel insisted on vanilla because sugar cookies are a mood, not a scent. By the time I reached the Yavapai Geology Museum, they were 3 exhibits ahead, and I was 3 lectures behind. I could feel Owen's impatience heat the space between us more than the desert did. When I commented on a cross-bedded sandstone displayed behind glass, Owen pivoted like a soldier. "Mom," he said, soft but sharp. "Can you please keep it to a minimum?" I said, smiling to appear benign. "Of course." We made it as far as the overlook with the coin-operated scopes, without further skirmish. Families milled like schoolfish. A boy begged his father for more quarters. A miner's beard of distant juniper-punctuated copper and ochre slabs. Heat pressed down and up at once, a hot hand from the sky and another from the rimrock. I reached for my hat's chin cord and felt the sweat line under my gray curls. When I turned to make one small, efficient comment about temperature, I realized they had all migrated as a unit toward the shuttle stop. I waved my hat. "Wait," I called, but my voice was thin under the murmur of wind and tourists. Owen glanced back, saw me, lifted a hand that meant something like both hello and goodbye, and boarded the shuttle with his family as if I were an afterthought that would, like most afterthoughts, catch up. The bus sighed, closed its doors, and drifted away on a cushion of heat shimmer. Forgotten is a dramatic word for being placed in the wrong column of a spreadsheet. But there I was, a 63-year-old woman at noon on the edge of the Grand Canyon, wearing a wide-brim hat, holding 2 half-frozen water bottles and a baggie of salted almonds, with 42 degrees of rage mixed with humor boiling beneath polite skin. I could have jogged after them and waited for the next shuttle. I could have called Owen and delivered a lecture on courtesy. I could have settled on the stone wall and performed a live radio show just for myself. What I did instead was what no one expected. I stepped into the shade of opinion, sat on a flat chunk of sandstone, and counted. "1," I said softly, "for how many times you've been told your voice is too much. 2, for how many summers you packed picnics and stories." When I reached 20, I realized I was not angry. Anger burns water you need for later. I was entertained. The desert, as it turned out, had a sense of humor, and I was in the mood to laugh with it. Besides, Lionel had taught me to plan my moods like routes. I studied the map board. The rim trail traced the canyon like a neat sentence. Beyond it, the land folded into a quieter grammar of service roads, maintenance paths, and little pockets where a person could be invisible while remaining very close to everything that mattered: shade, water, and other people's consciences. I know what you're thinking. Irresponsible, childish, dangerous. Let me assure you of 2 things. First, I did not plan to walk into the canyon or leave the main trail. Second, I had more sense than pride. I would never waste a rescuer's time for real. But I did want my family to feel the ache of presence the way I do when I'm silenced. I wanted them to notice how loud absence can be. So, I pretended to be lost. Not lost, radio requiring, helicopter kind of lost. Just lost enough to tug the world a little tighter around their throats. I slid my phone to airplane mode and tucked it under the elastic band in my notebook. I took inventory. 1.5 liters of water, electrolytes packets, hat, thin scarf, sunscreen, little tin of balm, almonds, Lionel's ancient emergency blanket folded to the size of a paperback, a whistle, a bandana printed with knots, and a laminated card with 3 words he wrote, and I refused to throw away. "You can wait." "You can wait," I told the worry, squinting at the idea of 42 degrees. I wrapped the scarf around my neck to shade the gap my collar kept missing, and moved along the rim until I found a quiet pullout where a big flat boulder leaned toward the canyon like a question. Behind it was a pocket of shadow big enough for a woman my size. Rare, precious shade. I stepped into it and felt the way sailors must feel when they drop anchor in a cove after days of glare. The temperature inside that pocket was a degree, maybe 2, kinder. The air smelled like warm pine and stone. I drank. I ate 7 almonds. I tucked the emergency blanket low along the ground to reflect heat outward and sat on my pack instead of the hot rock. Shade is currency. So is patience. I would spend both carefully. Around 12:45, the first text came. From Owen. "Mom? You still at Yavapai? We thought you were right behind." I did not answer. Not yet. At 1:02. Mom? Where are you? At 1:10, a call. I let it ring itself to sleep. At 1:17, Mara. Vera, this isn't funny. Please tell us where you are. I glanced at the crowd and saw them, moving like a four-person storm cell, scanning, faces blotched with heat and fear. The anger evaporated, replaced with something else I won't dignify by naming. But I stayed where I was. I watched a ranger speak to them, nod, gesture at the trail, at the museum, at the stretch between viewpoints. The ranger's patience looked like Lionel's. I felt a prickle of guilt. I ate 2 more almonds and set a boundary with myself. If a search escalated beyond a reasonable level, I would wave my hat. I would end it. My revenge had rules, Lionel's rules, because love, even vengeful love, behaves. By 2:30, the heat made the air a quivering thing you could almost pluck with your fingers. Someone nearby cracked a joke about frying eggs. A toddler wailed and then slept, limp as a doll, under a shade tent made of a bright towel, and 2 grandparents who took turns being trees. Across the path, Owen walked fast enough for his shoe to slap the asphalt. Mara's hair stuck to her temples. Ellie and Nico's faces, flushed and bare of headphones, kept lifting toward every older woman in a hat as if I might materialize out of the tourists like a trick. I waited. I watched. I rationed sips. I whispered to Lionel that I knew the difference between theater and danger, and would not cross it. At 5:06 p.m., the sun turned honey-colored instead of white-hot, and I felt the day loosen its fist. A small breeze tiptoed through the pinyon. I slid for my cubby to stretch, and the ranger from earlier glanced my way. He had the eyes of men who read landscapes the way some read faces, quickly and deeply. He didn't fix on me because there were a dozen women in hats within view, but my heart still thumped like a rabbit. I wasn't afraid. I was caught by the possibility of being caught. The family circled back toward the shuttle stop. Mara gestured wildly, her hands describing big shapes of worry. I heard the word alone float, as if the canyon were passing notes. Owen shook his head once, hard, at himself. And then, shame flickered like lightning across his face. The kind that strikes quietly, the kind only mothers recognize. I could have stood then. I could have walked out and made a joke about geology kidnappings. But the petty part of me, the human part, let's be honest, wanted a little more time. 12 hours, I decided. The dramatic phrasing came to me fully formed. I was forgotten in the desert for 12 hours. That would make a good opening line for a story, wouldn't it? Not entirely untrue. Not entirely kind. But sometimes truth is an angle, and I chose this one. As the sky bruised into pinks and plums, I moved along the rim to a quiet turnout near Pipe Creek Vista, where a stand of pinyon and juniper made a scraggly room. I spread the emergency blanket, wrapped it around my legs, and watched the canyon darken until it became a different animal altogether, shadow on shadow, soot blue and silver. Somewhere below, a trickle of water murmured like sleep. Coyotes yipped far off, the sound bouncing up like gossip. Night in the desert is not silence. It is a subtler music. Beetles clicked. A bird with a voice like a question mark called once, twice, decided I wasn't interesting, and left. Above me, the Milky Way smeared itself boldly across a sky so crowded with stars it made my throat ache. I listened to my own breath, steady, and to the faint rattle of nylon as I shifted. I thought of Lionel's last summer, when breath became the only thing that mattered. I thought of how he would have told me that proving a point is less important than being alive to make another one. 48 hours, I whispered, bargaining with a man who could no longer bargain. And then I go home with them. I promise. At 6:10 a.m., day 2 switched on like a light in a small room. Cold first, then instantly warm, then hot as if someone had dragged the sun closer with a hook. I measured out electrolyte powder into my bottle, shook it until the water turned an unfashionable color, and sipped while the first waves of tourists arrived in clean hats and fresh sunscreen, smelling like optimism and coconut. By 8 o'clock, I knew my family was back on the rim. You can tell people by the shape their worry makes. Owen's is a stiff halo. Mara's is a trembling kite string. Ellie's worry looks like a sprint. It tries to outrun itself. Nico sits very still and watches everything. From my hollow behind the boulder, I could see them occasionally through the moving forest of legs. Mara argued with a ranger. I could not hear the words, but her hands kept saying the same thing. We left her. We didn't mean to. We thought she was behind us. The ranger's hand said, "These things happen. We look, we find." Another ranger unfolded a map and traced possibilities with his finger. I did not want to punish the rangers. They were Lionel's people, calm, competent, allergic to drama. I would not drag them into a farce. So I altered my script. I would leave clues that pleased the professionals and worried the family, but did not require anyone to commit acts of heroism. I untied my bandana and threaded it through the lower branches of a juniper near the path, low enough for a child to see. I left my empty almond bag tucked under a rock beside the overlook rail. I walked half a dozen meters along the trail's edge, pressed my shoe soles firmly into a patch of fine dust, then stepped back into my hideaway, brushing the dust off with my scarf. If you're horrified, remember, the clues were right on the main trail, not down some dangerous spur. I was staging worry, not accidents. By 10:15, they found the bandana. I watched Ellie lift it, her face folding like paper. Nico touched the knot like it might know something. Owen pressed his lips together until color left them. Mara clutched the fabric to her chest. The ranger with the good eyes crouched, studied the dust prints, and looked toward a clump of manzanita. I wasn't behind. He knows I'm close, I thought, with both admiration and alarm. He straightened, spoke into his radio, and the net tightened. More volunteers in bright shirts fanned along the rim, unspooling calm procedure. The desert turned cruel at noon, as if it resented all our small human dramas intruding on its grand, slow work. Heat dug fingers into my scalp despite the hat. The rock behind me radiated invisible hammer blows. I slid the emergency blanket under me again to block the worst of it and rationed sips with the ruthlessness of a banker. Every 15 minutes, one mouthful. Every hour, two. Shade is currency. Spend poorly, and you'll pay later. Lionel's voice visited just after 1, the way memory does when you need it and when you don't. Stubbornness is a good traveling companion, he would say, as long as prudence rides shotgun. Prudence was thirsty. Pride, however, was wide awake and curious. What would they say if I could hear them? Would Owen admit the obvious? Would Mara? Would the children understand the difference between being dramatic and making a point that lands because it hurts a little first? At 3 p.m., as if a director had called for the big scene, I heard them all at once. They weren't 10 yards away, just past the boulder, voices braided with the sound of the wind. Mom. Owen's voice cracked the way it did when he was 13 and trying not to cry on a soccer field. Mom, please. A pulse leaped in my throat that had nothing to do with heat. Mara said, Vera, please don't punish us like this. And the way she said punish contained the kind of confession people never make on purpose. Ellie whispered, she wouldn't go down there, right? And Nico answered, careful, she knows better. The ranger's baritone cut through. We've got eyes along the corridor, folks. We'll keep sweeping. Best thing you can do is hydrate, find some shade, and stay put when we ask you to. And then Owen said the sentence I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. I did this, he told the ranger. The canyon, the wind. I kept telling her to be quiet. I left her. Mara said, we left her, and every drop of moisture in my body gathered in my eyes. I pressed my palm to the hot rock to anchor myself to something that did not cry. The ranger cleared his throat. No blame games. Let's find your mom, then you can argue about dinner table manners. A small line of laughter ran through the family like water, through cracked clay, fast, surprised, necessary. I almost stood then. I was one single decision away from stepping into the light and saying, you found me, as if they had. But the petty part of me tugged my shirt just a little longer. A promise is a promise. Night was easier, and I had water yet. I could manage. At sunset, the canyon went purple like a bruise, surrenders to healing. A hush rolled over the viewpoints, as if even the loudest children understood that light was performing a sacred act. I slid deeper into my notch and let the world become a cool animal again. Coyotes tuned their instruments farther west. The stars reheated. Sleep came in small handfuls. My back protested the rock recital. My calves sent messages about the cruelty of crouching. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed despite airplane mode because even I had forgotten one setting. Amber alerts don't care about your petty modes. The screen glowed like a small moon. I slapped my palm over it, heart thrashing, and waited for the night to swallow the light. By dawn of day 3, hour 41 if you're counting, the search had settled into a rhythm. The rangers worked in loops. Volunteers moved with quiet purpose. Tourists learned to step aside for bright shirts and radios and changed the subject from selfies to safety in the simple way humans do when reminded that consequences exist. Owen and Mara no longer paced everywhere together. They took turns sitting, drinking, then walking, as if they'd enrolled in a class titled How to Be Sane in the Face of Your Own Worst Moment. Ellie and Nico constructed a shade fort from 2 borrowed umbrellas and taught other children waiting at the overlook to fold paper cups into little fans. My heart swelled and hurt and swelled again. It was time. At hour 47, the ranger with the good eyes stood 10 feet from my hiding place and addressed a small knot of tourists in a voice meant to be overheard. If anyone sees a woman around 60, gray curls, green hat, patterned bandana, answers to Vera, please flag one of us. Do not take photos. Do not crowd. She may be confused and frightened. Confused. Frightened. The words were true in every story but mine. I was clear as quartz and calm as a parking lot at dawn. I was also nearly out of water and tired of teaching this lesson to people who by now had learned it. Pride had ridden long enough. Prudence tapped the map. I stood. Not dramatically, not with a cry, not with the arms flung to sky you see in movies where the hero is rescued by a helicopter. I simply stood and stepped into the open, as if I had been nothing but part of the landscape that finally decided to move. The ranger blinked once, the only betrayal of surprise. Then his face became a gentle map of relief. He lifted a hand in a slow greeting, as if taming a deer. "Miss Dunn?" he asked, voice pitched for skittish creatures. "Vera?" "I'm here," I said, and heard Lionel in my mouth. The ranger nodded, spoke into his radio, and the canyon changed key. A ripple of sound traveled out from us like a bird taking off, a word with wings. Found. The first of my family to reach me was Nico. He ran, then remembered every safety briefing he'd ever half heard, slowed to a fast walk, and still arrived at a run. His arms went around my middle with a force that made my ribs argue with one another. "Grandma," he said, then corrected himself without letting go. "Vera," the way he'd said my name when he was 4, and it sounded like very. Ellie reached us and cried in a way that was quiet and intimate, like she was telling my shirt a secret. Owen came last, walking as if each step might be the first wrong one after a long list of wrong ones. When he got close enough to see my face, something fragile in his broke and did not hurt him anymore. He lifted his hands, put them on my shoulders, and then he did not hug me. He rested his forehead against mine the way he had as a boy when fever made the world shiver. "Mom," he said, and apology and gratitude wrestled in that single syllable and came out twins. Mara hovered behind his shoulder, a smaller person than she had been 2 days ago, because worry had sanded down her sharp edges. "I am so sorry," she said. We should never. Words failed in a rare and righteous way. The ranger cleared his throat, not to interrupt, but to begin the business of being sensible. "Let's get Ms. Dunn to shade, fluids, evaluation. Then you all can reconnect properly." He winked at me so that only I would see and added, softly, "You did fine. But don't do that again." "I won't," I said, and meant it, because the lesson had landed for everyone, including me. In the tree-edged tent near the parking lot, a medic with laugh lines and calloused hands made me sip cold water until my pride was thoroughly diluted. She checked my pulse, asked me which president we currently tolerated, which made me laugh so hard she had to recount. You're good, she said. Strong. Stubborn, I said. Those are Siamese twins in this job, she replied, taping a tiny sensor to the back of my hand with affection. Owen sat on a folding chair, elbows on knees, and watched me as if I might evaporate if he blinked. Mara hovered, the emergency blanket she'd earlier cried into now a cape she didn't deserve but needed. Ellie made lists in a small spiral notebook. Things to bring Grandma when this is over. Nico danced in and out with cups of ice, as if he were transporting diamonds. When the medic released me with instructions that sounded like marriage vows, drink, rest, do not do anything stupid for 72 hours, I stood and turned to my family. The tent was a private room made of canvas and hum. I decided, then and there, that small truths belonged to us, not the canyon, not the strangers who had already turned their faces into antennas for gossip. The ranger with the good eyes hovered near the flap. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod, like a conductor giving a soloist her cue. I wasn't lost, I said. For words. The air pressure shifted. Owen became a statue a sculptor might title man, hearing his own fault echo. Mara's mouth opened, closed, opened. Ellie and Nico, who live in a world where performance is a currency they understand more fluently than cash, went still in a different way, respectful, curious. I was here the whole time, I said. Close. Very close. I could hear you. Mom. Owen whispered, a plea wrapped in a reprimand. Why? Because I talk, I thought.
Because you told me not to.
Because you forgot me like an extra bag you didn't want to carry. Because love is heavy and you tried to make it weigh less by making me small. I chose a gentler road to the same town. Because I needed you to hear the quiet without me, I said. So you would know the difference between silence and peace. Because you needed to realize that my voice is not a flaw, it's a feature. I smiled so he'd know I wasn't trying to draw blood. And because I knew how to keep myself safe while I waited. Mara's hands flew to her mouth. We thought we'd never get to tell you we were wrong. Tears made new maps down her dusted cheeks. I said such unkind things about your stories. I said they made everything about you. I was awful. You were hot, I said lightly. Heat makes saints into gossipers and gossips into villains. Drink water. Forgive yourself. Then do better. The medic, who had the social instincts of a black belt, busied herself with a clipboard to give us the illusion of privacy. The ranger stuck his head inside the tent, pointed at his watch in a way that said there was paperwork to do when we were ready, and vanished. Owen straightened, ran a hand through hair dust had turned the color of regret. I forgot you, he said, swallowing to own his piece properly. I kept telling you to be quiet, and I should have remembered that every interesting thing I know about the world came from your talking. He laughed through his nose. Dad used to say you could narrate paint drying and make it sound like opera. Your father was biased, I said, and all four of us smiled with a pain that healed while it hurt. We finished the paperwork. The ranger took a statement that was both accurate and kind, because generosity is a resource too. He did not ask pointed questions. He did not scold, though the set of his shoulders said he had a lecture in his pocket if I wanted it. I didn't. He folded the blanket I offered him, Lionel's, and tucked it into the lost and found bin, as if it were a flag being retired. If anyone asks, he said, you were found near the rim by family. That's true. And enough. On the walk to the car, the canyon looked different, not because it had changed, but because we had. We moved like people who had survived a small ending and found a new paragraph. Tourists glanced at me the way crowds glance at actors after a curtain call. Curious, kind, a little reverent, because they mistake drama for bravery. I wanted to tell them bravery is what rangers wear and mothers lend. Drama is what petty grandmothers stage when they are very hot and a little hurt. In the parking lot, Owen opened the rental's door and let a furnace's worth of air blast out. We laughed with a hysteria that rinsed the last of something sour from all of us. He found a bottle of half-melted gummy bears under the seat and threw it away, like an old habit. Mara adjusted the air vents toward me like a penance. Ellie and Nico sat very close, as if proximity were the part of the ritual that mattered most. Back at the lodge, we ate sandwiches made by a person who did not understand tomatoes and bread are a marriage of equals. We drank 3 pitchers of water and 2 of lemonade and did not apologize for the noise we made. I told a story about a lizard that deserved its own reality show. Owen did not flinch. Mara asked questions that were not about schedules. Ellie did an impression of the ranger so respectful and perfect the whole table shook with laughter. Nico counted the seconds between swallows because his brain enjoys order. When the check came, I grabbed it because revenge should never be free, not even mine. At dusk, we walked back to the rim for the sunset. I had denied myself for 2 nights. The canyon stretched and shrugged like a big animal considering sleep. My body hummed with exhaustion that felt clean, the way a swept floor looks. We stood shoulder to shoulder, and I let my voice do what it was born to do. Gather the day and hand it back. Look there, I said, nudging Owen's elbow. That purple isn't one color. It's every shadow layered together, like the world put on all its coats. It's beautiful, he said, the way very tired men say true things. Do you know what the ranger taught me? Mara asked, surprising me. He said the canyon makes its own weather because it's big enough to have its own rules. Like people. She looked at me with a new respect that was not charity. You make your own weather too, Vera. I should have brought an umbrella instead of a complaint. Bring a hat next time, I said. Umbrellas are show-offs. Ellie pointed at a kestrel that hung in the air like punctuation. Nico named 3 constellations before the sun had fully surrendered. We let the light end us gently and begin us again. When we returned to our rooms, there were notes under our doors from the ranger station, a simple thank you for cooperating, a reminder to hydrate tomorrow, a recommendation for a safer trail for families with an appetite for redemption. Owen held the slip as if it were a diploma. We should take them a box of cookies, he said. Something that doesn't melt.
Cookies melt, Mara said.
We'll bring them the good kind of jerky. Or oranges, I said, because there is no wrong time for oranges. We all slept early and hard, dreamless. In the morning, Owen knocked on my door with a tentative rhythm I recognized as the Morse code for apology. He stood in the hall with his hands in his pockets and his hair, trying to leave. Would you, he asked, narrate breakfast? I did. I described the way the butter surrendered to toast like kindness to opportunity. I described the coffee's particular virtue. Not good, but loyal. I described the way Ellie demolished her pancakes as if they were enemies of her state, and the way Nico applied jam with the seriousness of a surgeon. I described Owen's face when he decided to be a better man, and Mara's when she decided to be kinder to the world that had not asked her to be so sharp to survive it. By 10, we were back at the ranger station with a bag of oranges and a note in my handwriting that said, "Thank you for being the kind of people Lionel loved." The ranger with the good eyes accepted both and gave me a look that did not require words. "Enjoy the rest of your visit," he said. "There's a bench at Shoshone Point that's easy to miss." Don't. We didn't. We walked the quiet mile to a place where weddings whisper and wind writes cursive on skin. We sat on the bench that's easy to miss, and I told a story about the first storm I watched roll into a canyon, the way the rain falls in columns you can see like silk curtains, the way thunder swallows its own echo because the walls are greedy. And when I stopped, nobody filled the space with worry about too many words. Owen took my hand. Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. Ellie put her feet on my feet, as if we were playing an old game. Nico started to ask a question, stopped, smiled, and asked it anyway. On our last evening, the air took pity and cooled to a temperature that made sweat obsolete. We stood at the rim one final time, a family that had been briefly broken and hastily mended, and I gave them the ending I'd promised at the beginning. "You thought listening to me was the worst thing that could happen to you on a trip," I said. "But the worst thing is trying to listen for me and hearing nothing." I rested my palm on Owen's back. "Next time, let me talk. I'll spend my words carefully. You spend your listening generously. That's the exchange rate." Owen laughed softly.
Deal.
Mara joined her pinky to mine like she was signing a treaty from childhood she'd missed.
Deal, she said.
But if you start narrating paint drying, then you'll learn 50 new words for white, I said. Ellie groaned with theatrical despair and then grinned. Nico took a picture, not of the canyon, but of our shoes lined up along the rim. The most accurate portrait of us I've ever seen. We drove back to Flagstaff under a sky so large it made secrets ridiculous. In the rearview mirror, the canyon held still, doing the slow work of being old. In the front seat, I hummed the tune Lionel used to whistle when we were almost home. Owen did not ask me to be quiet. Mara asked me to turn it up. If you want a moral, take this. Sometimes the loudest thing in a family is not the talker. It's the unspoken assumption that love must be tidy to be true. It isn't. It's messy and hot and occasionally petty. It's also patient enough to sit behind a boulder for 48 hours waiting for pride to finish its tantrum. It will forgive you if you bring it water, a hat, a little shade, and the willingness to be found. I was forgotten in the desert for 12 hours and watched my family search for me for 48. When I finally let them find me, they learned that my chatter is not the worst thing that could happen on a trip. The worst thing is losing the person who makes even a canyon feel like a conversation. And the best thing? Letting them listen, at last, like the desert listens, wide open, no edges, every echo welcomed home.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!